Hey, I'm Alex Rackler from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Exoworld Survivor from Starling Games. Exoworld Survival is a 1 to 5 player cooperative experience in which players are trying to manage the resources of a planet before things get a little bit too far out of hand and everyone dies, or you run out of resources and then everyone dies, or you run out of oxygen and then everyone dies. In this game, you're going to be picking one of a variety of scenarios. You're going to have a scenario over here, you're going to have all these scenarios over here, whole bunch of them. The game comes baked in, this version of the game from Starling Games comes baked in with the expansion inside, which gives you more characters, more cards, more scenarios, but these are all going to give you different starting patterns. You're going to have over here, you're going to have different starting resources of where you're managing your actual income tracks over here, which usually, they're called income tracks, they're actually called production levels, but that's usually because you're losing things in this game. Every single round, you're going to be losing wherever your markers are. So for right now, you can see on 3 of the resources, at the end of the round, we're going to lower our actual resources by 2, and over here, the energy, we're actually going to maintain stability over the energy. That's a problem for you because as those resources slowly drop, as you get to the end of these tracks down here, you're going to start lowering this purple marker every time you can't lower a resource, and when that runs out, well, that's it. That's when the whole everyone dies part kind of happens for you. Now, you have options to try to mitigate around that, because on your turn, you're going to take 4 actions. You can control any number of characters. If you're playing the solo, you can control multiple characters, 1 character, however you want to do it over there. I think they actually recommend you control 3 characters in solo, but either way, in the game, you're going to be controlling different characters. You're going to have them set up over here, and then you're going to go ahead and take 4 actions every single round, and then reveal an event card in order to try to figure out what bad things are happening, because it's already bad. You're just going to make things worse as you go. To that end, you're going to have a hand of 4 cards. You're going to have, a hand of cards. How many cards you start with can have, all those things will vary based on the person you're playing as. For example, I'm playing as a Labor and Commander with a hand of 4 and 6 cards respectively. They have 2 and 3 movement, and then they have their own ability over here. You're going to look at your hand of cards, and every card has a type that it is, and then what it costs to build that. So for example, to build this building over here, let's say to build this one over here, these solar panels would require that I have 1 yellow card, which I have over here, plus 1 red card, and this one over here is wild. I can use it for anything. When you do so, you're going to build a card. So for example, let's say we build this biofuel plant. We'll lower our production levels by 1 if we built that, and we'll increase our energy production levels by 2. That would be great, except for the small problem that energy on this planet is actually already fine. So while good, it could still be good because we can use that energy later to pay for other things. It's still not necessarily as helpful, and in fact, it means that at the end of the round, we're going to lower 1, 2, 3, and raise our energy by 1, 2 over here, and these are going to lower by 1, 2 at the end of the turn if we had gone ahead and built that card, if you had played that card out over there. So the general idea is you're going to take actions to draw cards, actions to play cards. You have a little play area over here so you can move around the planet. You can produce supplies. Depending on where you are, you can actually produce supplies of that card. You can shut down various modules, reverting their effects. So you can have various shutdown tokens. When you put them on a module, it's going to revert that module. It's going to negate the effects of that module, going back to the track as if it doesn't exist. You can repair tokens from the modules. There's going to be various events that are going to put negative effects onto those modules. You can repair those. You can draw cards, recycle, reveal cards, transfer cards between players. If you're sharing the same zone, if you're in the same spot over here, you can transfer cards. You can deploy modules, which is that action you saw where I went ahead and built the module, putting it into play. All those are the actions you're going to take from the 4 actions you take every turn while you try to place as many of these cards out in order to manage and mitigate your resources. So the basic loop cycle over here, the basic loop you're going to find yourself in, is you have 4 actions on your turn. There's a bunch of actions you can take, but the most common actions are going to be drawing cards. You can have a pool of cards over here, and that's also going to depend on the planet how many cards you have visible. There's 2 face-up cards that are visible in play. You're going to go ahead and be able to draw those into your hand, to be able to build modules, affect these stats, and hopefully try to persevere past the negative things happening faster than the negative things happening. Now, the other things going on is going to be the event cards over here. So you're going to have a deck of event cards. You're going to draw event cards. Sometimes they're going to be events that have actual effects on them. Other times they're going to reference the scenario events. So there's critical and normal events that are shuffled into the deck over here, and that references based on the actual planet that you're, or based on the scenario you're playing as. So those will be customized to the scenario. So the event deck always has some degree of flavor to the actual scenario you're engaging in. And that's basically how you play Exoworld Survival. Take 4 actions a turn. Use those actions to try to improve your situation before things get too dire, then do all the bad things, rinse and repeat until you've either won or lost the game. And with that, let's go into the review, starting off with ease of play. Rulebook's very easy to dive into, the setup to teach all those things. If you've played any cooperative game, this is going to be very reminiscent to your standard cooperative scenario. You have a certain player, you have a number of actions, you use those actions to try to improve things, then bad things happen. Rinse and repeat until you've either managed to persevere past that and win, or until you've actually lost the game instead, and just repeat that loop. So if you've played a cooperative game, this has the same bones as that, and there's some nuances around the unique actions over here, how each scenario operates, all of that stuff, but for the most part, a very easy game to get up and running. As far as game time, you're looking at anywhere between 45 to 60 minutes for a multiplayer game. The solo game, you can probably run through it faster, 30 to 45 minutes, just because less table talk and running through all that, but not overly long. And table space is a little bit more than what you see over here. This is like set up for like maximum filming efficiency. You'd need more space around the cards, but not a lot of table space for this game. Which brings us to the review, starting off with what I like, which is there's a lot of getting the core game engine is about bumping your stats. And to that end, when you actually are able to play a card, you gather up the cards you need, you pay the cost, you play a card, and you bump the stats, that is a action that's going to take most of your turns, sometimes 2 turns to be able to get done. By nature of any card, if a card costs two cards to play, then the action of drawing the card you're going to need, drawing the 2 cards you're going to need to pay for it, and then playing the card, a standard 4 action cycle is what it's going to take just to build a basic regular card. And then cards get more expensive and less expensive, plus you need the right cards. That means you're often going to be moving around the board and able to meet up with somebody over here in order to trade cards with them and be able to go ahead and play that actual module that will help you out. So there's going to be more efficiency towards that. So you're looking at anywhere between 3 to 6 actions to be able to play a card, which means anywhere between 1 to 2 turns to play a card, which means you've worked for it. And sometimes the things that will just modify things in minor ways. Maybe you just go ahead and trade a little bit of this yellow energy for a little bit water production. You didn't actually get a net positive in terms of your number of resources, but you got a net positive in terms of the types of resources. But ultimately, playing a card and getting those resources, those stat trackers back in your favor is a satisfying aspect of the game. The fact that you have variable scenarios, asymmetric characters, all of that, or I shouldn't say asymmetric characters, say varied character roles and all that, means you also have a bit of variety mixed into the experience. There's also a whole shuffling as far as where events and special cards are going to go into the decks as well. Those will again give you some degree of a variable flavor to the experience. But the core cycle is take actions, do something that's, rewarding to do, and try to do so within variable scenarios and variable characters as you go through it. As far as what I don't like in the game, I'll even start with the last thing that I said is a positive, which is the scenarios and the characters, and while those things are positives, they're not meaningfully different. I didn't find the character roles to be so interesting. They usually like get an action for free or something like that. They weren't uniquely interesting to the game engine. I think the game's a little limited in how much of a 3D space it's engaging in, and to that end, it's like, hey, get a free movement, get a free draw, get a free transfer. For the most part, it's like, here's an action, and you can have that action for free. That's the level of interest to the characters, which means most of them come down to pretend you really have 5 actions instead of 4, just that last action is specific to something that's going on. Similarly, the scenarios as well. Scenarios didn't feel significantly different. There weren't like large rules changes. They usually affect, the actual scenario events that will come into play, which happen, but not that frequently. And then the initial production, there's also the conditions on the planet. We haven't heavily talked about that, but certain cards over here will give you a stat, but also this card is going to additionally reward you by whatever number is on the condition, effectively making a standard card in the game potentially variable to the scenario based on those ambient conditions that are being referenced. But for the most part, these scenarios didn't feel uniquely different. Sure, they give you different starting resources and different stats, but that just affects the difficulty as opposed to feeling like a different beast. So the first thing I don't like is even though I like the fact that there's a variety of scenarios and a variety of characters, they didn't feel meaningfully different. I also say there's a lot of work for tiny returns in this game. Very often you are putting a lot of energy into, congratulations, I just spent 2 turns and I built a card. And yes, it is rewarding to build a card, but more often than not, all you're really doing is you're managing these stats from being less bad for you. So now instead of losing 3 right at the end of the turn, we're going to lose 2 because I spent 2 turns working on that thing happening, meaning you're putting a lot of effort and energy into the game, and the reward you get for it is, hey, you spent 2 turns making the situation slightly less worse. Which, again, that is the way the game is designed, that is the nature of the game, but to me that's just a lot of work to have a slightly less punishing end turn. It doesn't feel like I accomplished things so much as I, put my finger in the wall and slightly held back the flow of water. It's the work to reward ratio didn't feel, I'm not getting a cool ability or something fun or positive, not improving my engine in a typical sense, you're just making things slightly less bad after putting a lot of work into it. There's also lots of randomness to the game as far as whether you get the right cards that will help you out in the game. There's a lot of card draw and then trying to mess around with other players, trying to figure out how to get to where the other players are, trade with them. Again, using precious actions to get that up and running. The game is mostly about how to slow down your demise. There's not a lot of fun, interesting, rewarding things happening here. There's a lot of, let me spend a lot of effort to make things slightly less bad while not necessarily getting a lot of satisfaction out of the experience, at least not for me. As far as I can see others not liking, I don't know. There's a bunch of stuff in the stuff I don't like, so I don't know if I need to have a lot for that category. I'll move to final thoughts on Exoworld Survival. I was excited about this game when I first read the rules. I like stat tracking. This is a game I played a while ago, a game I covered on the channel called Three Tail, that the entire game was about messing with various stats and trying to improve your stats in the game to get to the end game where you use those stats in the boss. And the whole game was about, I jokingly refer to it as stat tracking in the board game. And I still jokingly referred to as stat tracking the board game. I thought it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the engine in the process. That's because a lot of what you were doing to build yourself up had a degree of satisfaction, of improved everything that you did. Everything you did felt stronger. In Exoworld, though, I walked into it feeling I would get that sense, and then playing it just was far, far less satisfying. There's a lot of work to modify the stats. This is also stat tracking the board game, just in a less rewarding, less fun, less enjoyable sense. It's a lot of work, effort, and energy not to do cool things, but to have things that are slightly less bad happen until you get to a point of survival. But at no point do you get more interesting. At no point does the engine get more interesting. Does the gameplay get more interesting? It is the same thing start to finish. It runs a little long because it's repetitive and not particularly rewarding in terms of what you're doing past just slow mitigation so that you can hopefully win before the game crushes you down. And that meant that I walked into this one wanting to like it, thinking I would like it, and kind of feeling like the experience just wasn't one that's for me. For me, this is a 2 out of 5. It's not a game. I don't think it's a bad game. To be very clear, I don't think it's a bad game, and I can see people enjoying it. I think there's a fine line between when you're fighting back against bad things happening, when does it feel tedious versus when does it feel rewarding? And I don't have a perfect answer for when that is. I just know that for me, Exoworld Survival doesn't hit that notch. I can see people enjoying this one, but I'm just unfortunately not into that category. For me, this is a 2 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, a game that does feel similar to in its high levels is Pandemic. It's going to feel very reminiscent of Pandemic in terms of the overall structure of the game, while being different in its actual execution. And then similarly, I'll also recommend Three Tail. It's not actually out or available yet, at least not at the time of this filming, but it's a game that if you do want to hunt it down, I think it kind of has similar vibes in terms of what it's trying to do, but for me, it did so in a much more rewarding and engaging fashion. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this review helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.